Thanks, Chris. So my name is Elizabeth, and I am a client success manager here at Rustici, and I'll kind of be acting as our MC today. I'm joined by our Director of Sales and resident bird whisperer, Chris Tompkins. Behind the scenes, we've got our amazing marketing team. Tara, Alicia, and Kelly are all kind of working behind the scenes, helping with production, and they're managing all the chirping in the chat. So please feel free to drop any questions that may come up during our conversation here today. And Chris and I are going to take a gander of those there at the end. So for now, welcome. We're so glad that you could take time to join us today to learn a little bit more about how Content Controller might be able to help with your organization's training needs. All right, what will we be talking about today? Today is really going to be sort of a bird's eye view, an overview of different ways that Content Controller can help you. And we're going to be giving a lot of kind of real world examples straight from use cases that we see with our customers every day. We're going to be talking through some different ways that our customers are solving common training problems as organizations. So you can kind of think, what training needs do you have and what solutions might be able to work for you too? Of course, this is a pretty broad list covering a lot of different challenges. So kind of keep that in mind. You may not check all of these boxes, but if any of them happen to apply to your situation, Content Controller can certainly help. Whether it's distributing your training to customers, partners, and resellers, being able to handle the complexities of different e-learning standards, managing multiple LMSs or the dreaded move from one learning management system to another, being able to offer courses in multiple languages and delivering sensitive content as well. Chris is going to talk a bit more about the challenge that is faced by organizations distributing product training.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And thanks everybody for being here. Again, this is going to be some weird, niche, uncommon use cases for this tool, but I hope it inspires some creative thinking around the organization that you work inside of. We see that on average, organizations have 20 or 30 e-learning tools being used in conjunction. We always thought it'd be one LMS to rule them all, an easy egg. Hey, here's where all of our learning and training lives. But it turns out there's a lot of stakeholders involved with the different tools at an organization, how compliance programs work, how advanced education works, how skill training within an organization works. So extended enterprise is an easy example of an e-learning tool that could influence a marketing department, where you end up in a situation where product training happens for retail associates on the front line, and you want your product to sell better. And what better way to get it in your customers' hands than to make sure that frontline associates are fully trained? They've been using marketing teams for years to deliver that type of training inside of a large retailer's LMS, but using Content Controller can help those teams understand the impact, to be able to get at data they've never had before, to say, is there a relationship between training at retail and sales at that location? We also see things where associations, large accounting firms need continuing education training. And for years, these subject matter experts have been delivering training to them, but it turns out they need records of completion in order for continuing education, for mandatory CE credits every year, and being able to deploy to those large organizations where those skilled learners live and still see things from an association perspective. They can begin to understand the learning journey that their professional learners have between their own environment and things they're attending and things that they're logging into, and stitching that together is possible using a tool like Content Controller, enabling skills that those type of associations didn't have before. So I'm really excited about that. And if you look inside of our egg here, we've got a lot going on. There's learning management systems, there's sales tools, there's channel partners. It turns out these are complicated situations where you don't have to just deliver a course and say, have a nice day. Using tools like Content Controller, we can begin to start to get at data that has been unavailable and to help you play nicely in another world without giving up insight and control. So Elizabeth's going to walk us through what is a single source of truth, because I think that that's what all these teams that we're describing today are trying to get at.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Content Controller can provide the solution to that distribution problem by providing a single source of truth for your content. You can seamlessly distribute your product training out to your customers, partners, reseller LMSs, and the goal is for you to be able to have all of your ducks in a row to seamlessly be able to send out that training. And Content Controller solves those challenges for you. So regardless of the content, e-learning standards, any LMS requirements or rules and regulations that you're bound to, we have seamless course versioning. You're able to gain valuable insights into your learners, and reports live where you need them to live. There are licensing management tools that can kind of help you keep things organized and allow you to continue to keep your ducks in a row for your customers and your partners, anyone you may be sharing out to. It provides that single source of truth where your content will live. And from there, you have so many possibilities. On the next slide, we've actually got a quote from one of our customers that is a parts supplier, and they're using Content Controller to distribute their product training. And something they've been so impressed with is how that Content Controller gives them a deeper look into how their customers are actually using those trainings. And those insights are invaluable. In the past, when they sent that training off, those are insights they were missing because they didn't have communication still with that content. So those insights have really been invaluable to them. Chris is going to dig a little more into, we've got a couple of specific real world examples from our customers of how they're using Content Controller every day.
So I get excited when we get card stuff. I'm also a card guy in addition to knowing way too much about birds. And Valvoline is a fascinating case study that I love talking about. They are the big marketing company, the extended enterprise use case, and they have a lot of big and exciting data. E-learning standards take us so far, but Content Controller enables them to go into locations where oil changes are happening. And it's always interesting to overlay data with the coupons they're running and the training they're doing at oil change centers and the promotions and the signage and there's a big puzzle. And teams need to invest in the things that they can quantify as working. Quickly stop doing the things that no one's doing, pivot to the things that have an impact. And using this, they are able to correlate all of the different sales activities going on to deduce that, wow, if you train associates on the value of Valvoline products at the place where retail happens, it turns out the associates guiding a customer towards the right product are better at choosing Valvoline products if they're well trained on the Valvoline products. And it's one thing to just give them a video or give them a PDF or give them a SCORM course or something. It is a whole other thing to deliver that content to their LMS and get that two-way exchange of what's happening. They are delivering about 33,000 launches a year through this. They're serving thousands of learners, and they're managing these large client accounts remotely, updating the training as the product evolves and as the marketing efforts change. Turnover at those retail locations can be quite high at times. And this is helping them to deliver the right piece of training in near real time to the retail associates that are in front of customers. And this has unlocked a lot for them. In their own words, working with the team at Rusty Software, it simplifies how we manage training across their partners. They can now easily share training content to all of the different LMSs. Each one of their partners has a different LMS, and each LMS does its own weird thing. And this allows the Valvoline team to go straight to those in their network and then still track how training improves the sales performance and the customer experience. It's always about the customer experience. And this helps Valvoline reach into a system that they don't have, deliver a better piece of training, and then understand its efficacy so they can make some smart decisions around it. I think there are a lot of other use cases out there for Rustasy customers who need to deploy easily and fix problems in someone else's system, but also not only remain in control of the license, but to see how it's being used. Teams that can study their content can build better training. We also saw in the tourism industry, COVID hit, immediately teams have to pivot and start doing things. They were heavy face-to-face trainers before it all went away. So they immediately had to pivot online. And when looking at their customers' use cases, they discovered that it turns out most of their target audience already had an LMS somewhere. And so instead of building a huge LMS and making everybody come to them, their quick strategy was, let's just go where they all live. And it turned out they had a lot of different learning management systems to deal with at once. And they used Content Controller to streamline their training to all of these multiple audiences and internal employees and agencies and a B2B model and a B2C model. And it turned out this approach helped them be nimble and care far less about where learning was happening, and instead put your training where learners live. In their own words, with the other platforms, they had large LCMSs that they were using before Content Controller. Those platforms were limited to the structure of how they wanted to deliver it. This training team very much care about the learning journey, and being able to do advanced things in Content Controller, but deliver a simple experience to the end learner was key for them. It wasn't what they needed in the LCMS world, so Content Controller provided enough advantage, and it was a home run for them. Anytime you're working in those ecosystems where you've got a bunch of platforms, a bunch of LMSs, it can be a real challenge. Elizabeth's going to navigate the different LMSs and standards a little bit for us.
Thanks. Navigating LMS requirements and the complexities of e-learning standards can be really difficult, and you may run into a whole flock of problems. Content Controller allows you to bridge the standards gap across your systems. So it decouples the content production from the LMS limitations or variability. As you start to have more and more clients, you'll probably start hearing about standards more. SCORM 1.2, SCORM 2004, LTI. You may have even been asked to provide your product training in a certain standard by one of your external clients and then a different standard for the next client. But all you really want to be able to do is to get your product training in the hands of resellers and have them be able to take that training. You know, internally, we'll see this a lot when you want to acquire or create content in a certain standard, but maybe your LMS requires a different standard and you need a way to be able to enhance your LMS. And Content Controller solves this for both of those scenarios. Chris is going to tell us a little bit more about the challenges that you might encounter if you are making the big move from one LMS to another, or if you're stuck managing multiple learning management systems.
Yeah, so think of it like a switch kit. Sometimes Content Controller isn't about selling content. That's the obvious use case. Candidly, it's why we built it. But it turns out we've been working with a lot of really large partners, and they're moving from big name LMS number 1 to big name LMS number 2, and vice versa. And oh my goodness, a lot of them have hundreds or thousands of existing SCORM courses, and one LMS prefers SCORM 1.2. The other LMS only supports SCORM 2004, 3rd edition. And looking at switching between LMSs can be a nightmare. It can be years of effort to go rebuild all of the content you have in SCORM 1.2 into SCORM 2004. It can be millions of dollars to outsource that pain. But if you use Content Controller, we can put all the content into Content Controller in whatever format it's in today. and we can connect it to another LMS in whatever LMS standard they support. And this can be a way to mix and match, to work between not only how to move, but also in an ecosystem with a bunch of LMSs. We have clients that use it as a centralization tool. They gave up trying to have one LMS to rule them all. They're in an acquisition mode. They're growing quickly. They're buying 2 or 3 brands a year. And every time they acquire a new company, that company has to go through an integration. And that integration is get central HR, get central finance, all of the things that happen after an M&A event. But with Content Controller, they can leave the learning and training alone. Have its compliance. Work stops without it. So leave whatever LMS that branch had. Don't interrupt any part of their training and compliance program, but give them all of the content they need to take in their own LMS. And home office can still see what's happening at all of these acquisitions relative to their training and learning programs. It's a fantastic way to not have to integrate a new LMS for the sake of a consolidation, some type of larger corporate structure, some type of departmental change, some type of acquisition or a split. Being able to continue to deliver training after a sale would also be important here. So moving between LMSs and living amongst LMSs is core to how Content Controller is an obvious way to solve some problems. We have customers doing this out in the wild. A large defense contractor has a bunch of Moodles out in the world at all of these different schoolhouses that train people on different skills. And trying to deal with deploying modern advanced content inside Moodle can be hard. Moodle has fantastic support for SCORM 1.2. It's the world's largest open source learning platform in the world. It does fantastic things. But SCORM 1.2 is limiting in the scope of what these folks want to do in a training experience. So they use Content Controller. The team can see everything that's happening with their content. They can build better and fancier content, and they can deploy it out to all the different Moodles in the world, secure the content, and see what's happening. It's important for them. We also see use cases where, wow, we're trying to solve a language problem. And LMSs have tried this in the past, and there are a bunch of different strategies, but Content Controller is more than just a distribution license tool. For some of our organizations, it provides enough language support to be worth using it all on its own. So we have a toucan here trying to learn a course on teaching bird puns. This is great. But normally what an LMS administrator has to deal with is that this toucan logs into Moodle. And if you're giving 4 different language courses, it's really 4 different e-learning packages loaded into Moodle. And the LMS administrator has to figure out which of these 4 should this learner take. But a larger headache is that if the LMS administrator just wants to see, has the toucan finished bird pun training, well, you have to run 4 reports and you have to concatenate the results and find, is there a completion status amongst one of these 4 packages? It gets really hard. And when things get really hard, LMS administrators tend to not have time to run that fancy report for you. So you really don't know what's happening. What Content Controller allows us to do is to say, well, this course lives in Content Controller, and we're going to nest all 4 of these language options into one package. And we'll deploy one course, bird puns, to Moodle. And we end up in a situation where when it launches from Moodle, Content Controller says, hey, Mr. Toucan, which of these do you want to take? Plays that language version for the learner, rolls up the session, and then puts it back in Moodle as one completion status. This can help teams understand, is your training being done within the LMS? Easy to report on. But the content team can add more languages later as the localization finishes. And more importantly, again, I feel very strongly that teams that understand how their training is being used can make better decisions. You could go in at any time and go, my goodness, no one has ever taken the Spanish version. maybe we don't need to pay for that anymore. Don't deploy a language that's not being used. Understand what is and double down on those. Maybe it changes the order in which things are translated so that your team maximizes their time. And in fact, we have customers that use this in a multinational situation to deploy in French Canadian and English and Spanish and German all at the same time, so that they can continue to build training on highly technical parts and deliver them around the world at once in real time in the language that the customer prefers, without ever having to deal with that complexity inside of another LMS. Because often you're not in charge. You're not the LMS administrator. You can't set up elegant language packages for them. And more importantly, you can't see how it's being used. So Content Controller often helps you deliver a more advanced experience in a simpler way for your customer to digest. Elizabeth, sometimes we run into situations where the data is sensitive. Talk us through how Content Controller can help.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. There are definitely situations where we'll encounter content that's really sensitive. There may be rules and regulations about learner information and things with maybe what you like to call the secret squirrel customers, people that have content that the lawyers and people involved don't want that content to get out and be available to just anyone. And that content can be a little quacky to deal with. When you're using Content Controller to deliver training of more sensitive content, or when there's a lot of rules around the privacy and security, Content Controller really helps you keep that peace of mind. The full version of your content always lives in Content Controller. We help you store the full version of the content in Content Controller, and then we just give you a tiny 10 kilobyte shell file to share out to the LMS. And that way, your content, that sensitive, quacky content, is never out of your hands. We encounter this a lot in the cybersecurity space. Content may need to live on special servers. Healthcare is another industry that's heavily impacted with certain rules and regulations around content being really sensitive. And I even have a customer currently in the healthcare space that are using Content Controller to deliver sensitive training that they must maintain control over. And they've called Content Controller a lifesaver for them time and time again. Their content's able to live inside of Content Controller and it never leaves. You're able to maintain that control, and you don't lose control over those assets. Lots of high compliance industries with that sensitive training, this can be so helpful for them. Now, on the next slide is what I personally, and just from talking to a lot of customers as well, I feel like is one of the most egg-citing features that we have in Content Controller. You guys know we're living in an ever-changing world. Things are changing every day. And inside of Content Controller, we have seamless course versioning so that you can ensure that your learners are taking today's training and have the most up-to-date information inside of their training. Any high compliance training like or industry with the gas, oil, multinational, accounting, healthcare, Content Controller allows for seamless content versioning, and you never have to worry about what content your learners might be seeing, whether it's old and outdated. You can make sure that they're seeing the most current up-to-date thing. Regulations and compliance rules change all the time, and there's that need for historical data, which is stored in Content Controller for various versions of courses. You're able to really save your clients' time and your LS administrators' time. Once you deliver the content, that little shell file we talked about a moment ago, once you deliver that to the LMS administrator, they've got it. Updates can be made through versioning in Content Controller without you ever needing to share another file with them. In fact, I was just talking to one of my healthcare clients the other day who've been licensing Content Controller for years, specifically for that issue on the previous slide of having sensitive content that they needed to be able to deliver and maintain control over. And since they've been using Content Controller over the years for that one specific use case, other teams and departments within their company have seen how well it's worked for them. And they may not work specifically with the sensitive content, but other teams have started using Content Controller specifically for versioning alone, because it makes the process of updating their content so seamless. And the ability to update course versions inside of Content Controller and not have to deal with that honestly cumbersome task of sending out entire course files back and forth to LMS admins, it's an absolute game changer for them. And it's removed a huge burden in terms of time, man hours, and honestly just given them the assurance that the accurate, most updated content is available to their learners. Here at the end, we've got a few more customer quotes we want to hop into just to here's where you can hear from what our customers and what they're saying about using Content Controller. It really highlights their pain points before using Content Controller and how our product has been able to relieve those challenges across a variety of industries. So we've got here a quote from a consumer goods provider sharing how excited they were about course versioning specifically. They were sharing with their clients about how much easier that process would be for them, and they've been so excited to be able to use this. On the next slide, we've got a customer in the medical education training space, and they are loving Content Controller, and they're wishing they had pulled the trigger on this years ago. This old way of doing things, they say it just doesn't cut it anymore. And once they started using Content Controller, they've found a million different business opportunities they can apply it to, in their own words. And then finally, I love this customer quote specifically for a manufacturing company because it calls out a special shout out to Rustice's #1 bird, our very own Matt Bird from our delightful support team. And we take a lot of pride in the support that we provide to customers. And we're really there to help and support your team every step of the way. And we really want to help you soar with Content Controller. So hearing from this customer that Content Controller was no fuss, no surprises, it does what they need them to do. And to hear an extra shout out to one of our team members was really special. And Chris is going to kind of summarize and wrap things up for us today before we dig into questions.
Yeah, so we've looked at some weird ways to use Content Controller. This was intentionally things beyond just use it to sell and retain ownership. It's great at that. We found its main road. That's why we built it. But these are the weird use cases: migrating content between LMSs, living in a bunch of LMSs, a centralization strategy, the extended enterprise, giving marketing teams training data in LMSs that they have no access to as retail partners, as customer-facing roles, as distributors, people in your supply chain. There's a number of folks that extended enterprise reach provides actionable insights to what's working and what's not. And then also that content distribution, the language support, being able to simplify things inside of your own different Moodle deployments. I'm really excited. I've seen the questions as Elizabeth's been wrapping up, and I think I just kind of want to dive straight into some of these because they're good. But please, the chat's open, put things in there. Alicia and Tara are doing a fantastic job at helping us bubble up the interesting things. And I think I just want to start at the top here. Drew, you asked a great question. Would Content Controller distribute to our LMS as well to our partners? Meaning we'd no longer be configuring content directly in your OMLMS. Yeah, that's right. You could use Content Controller as the place where you put your materials, and you can build more advanced content that does what you need it to do. And however it plays and tracks in Content Controller's player is exactly how it will play and track, whether you give that LMS a tiny little SCORM 1.2 course, a SCORM 2004 course, AICC, CMI5, LTI. give those LMS partners whatever they know how to use and whatever they tell you they need. And your instructional design team can go build things that are important to you and simplify your connection to another LMS via a tiny little cheater file. We call them dispatch packages. They are 10 or 11 kilobytes or links or shells to whatever that other LMS will have, but none of your intellectual property lives inside it. All of the real version of the course lives in Content Controller so that your team can do what they do and simplify the connection to another LMS. So it features one library for all of your content. You'll upload whatever you need there, and you'll distribute it however you need there. So we have a lot of inputs and a lot of outputs, and Content Controller deals with those connections to make it easy so that you don't have to learn all there is to know about another LMS. Andy Norman, what type of information is retained about a learner and their activity in Content Controller? Can it be exported? The information in there is a great question. Typically, Content Controller, when it is delivering a piece of content to another LMS, that LMS is going to launch a tiny shell of that course, and it talks to Content Controller and says, here is a first name, a last name, a unique learner ID, and a course ID. And with those 4 pieces of information, Content Controller knows who you are, what piece of content you're trying to take. It can decide whether or not you're supposed to have access to it, date by date, seat caps, all types of different methods there. If you're supposed to have access to it, it plays the course. It tracks all of that information in Content Controller. That information can be integrated using links that we provide, Excel spreadsheets, or even a REST API to help you go do things with it. And the coolest part is that when the learner finishes, it wraps up that data, it returns the learner back to the LMS they came from, and it talks to that LMS and updates all of its reports too. So you end up with a good record of that information in Content Controller and a good record of that information in whatever LMS it is, in whatever way that LMS normally reports. There is an obvious question about like data privacy, GDPR for our international customers, and Content Controller is fully GDPR compliant on an account by account basis. You can choose to hash or block the personally identifiable information in Content Controller, but the end LMS will have full PII and you don't have access to it. So you can strengthen your GDPR obligations in that way. We're happy to talk through those details, but it's a really flexible tool designed just for that. So great question, Andy. Amian asked a great question. Hey, can we take a tour? Not today, but I would love to do it one-on-one. This webinar just isn't set up for that. I'm normally the first guy to just share my screen, but I would love to do that tour with you. For what it's worth, if you don't want that live sales pitch, we're not a very high pressure sales organization, but we do have webinars where you can watch us walk through that user interface. I fully believe that the best way to experience software is to play with the software. We'd love to do that with you one-on-one, or you can watch a video tour, whichever is best for you. I don't want to have too much sales pressure there. We do have ways to set up a POC to get people involved, to crawl, walk, and run into our solutions. Call us, we'll walk you through that together. You did ask a question, do you pay for a license to use the software and manage multiple training courses, objects inside it? Yeah, we will handle the transmission, the broadcasting, the streaming of the content. Content Controller deals with all of those things, and your license allows you to scale based on your library size or your learner population or a bunch of other metrics. So happy to talk through that. We host these things all the time and can handle all the international scale you need there. Not a big deal. Raymond Butler asked a great question. He said, in a situation like you described, where a secondary LMS requires CMI5 and all of the content that you already have in your library is still SCORM 1.2, is Content Controller, how does it do it? You're dead on. We create a tiny shell, a connection using CMI5, a more modern standard. When that piece of content is launched, it goes over to Content Controller. Content Controller fully understands CMI5. We will stream the SCORM 1.2 content. We will track time, completion, pass, fail, score, the things SCORM 1.2 does really well. We will store those away as SCORM 1.2. We will automatically convert the tracking information into CMI5 and then translate it back to the LMS. Content Controller can help your team support legacy content inside of an advanced LMS, or go the other way, build CMI5 content and play it in a SCORM 1.2 only LMS. This is a tool that, again, helps switching. And switching could be helping your team go build new content without having to go re-author all the things they've already done. In a lot of ways, Content Controller helps future-proof the content you already have. So great question. Joe, do they, Moodle, support only e-learning courses like SCORM, or does Moodle support videos and other formats of learning? Great question. I am not a Moodle expert for what it's worth. I've been at Rusticy a long time and have played with Moodle plenty. You should go to the Moodle community because there's details there of what's supported, and Moodle has a bunch of plugin architecture that can do nearly anything with enough work. I will say that Content Controller can support all types of content: SCORM, AICC, XAPI, CMI5, even PDFs, MP3s, MP4s, where Content Controller will just play those things and translate it into CMI5 or SCORM or whatever the LMS needs to digest, with full tracking layered on top of it using CMI5 and some XAPI. So we're able to do things in Moodle, even if your instance of Moodle doesn't support video tracking and playback and CDNing in the way that you want it to. Content Controller could be a more elegant way to deploy basic videos into Moodle using their existing SCORM support and adding layering tracking on without the need for an authoring tool. So Content Controller can play an advantage there. Michael says, does the shell file look like a standard SCORM file to another LMS? Yep, that's exactly what's happening there. We are publishing just a shell of a SCORM 1.2, a SCORM 2004, third or fourth edition package, AICC. They're generally small, around 10K in size, and your intellectual property doesn't live inside that small package. It is a reference to Content Controller, where Content Controller will stream the full version. And because of that relationship, we're able to update the full version without having to go and replace files in the LMS. So a great use case there. Andy asks, if content is deployed in a customer's LMS, can it be deactivated from Content Controller? What's that experience like? Great question. Yes, we give you full license control. So you could deploy your whole library to a customer. A year later, they don't renew. They'll still have all of those shells, those empty small files in their LMS. But when Content Controller sees that their expiration date is up and they didn't renew, when that learner tries to launch those courses, it will give you a customizable message that says something along the lines of, you should contact your administrator. Something went wrong. We allow you to intervene and deliver whatever message you think is best, but it will restrict access in a way that's elegant there. What that experience like is somewhat tailorable. By default, it just says there's a problem. The learner goes, talks to their admin calls you, you say, hey, you didn't renew, you don't pay, you don't stay. That gives you a good moment. We also have traffic lights to allow an account manager to know what limits are coming and intervene at a time that makes sense. Drew, is it possible to deliver content directly to a website via another LMS? Yep. Content Controller includes a license of another Rusticy product called RxD, Rusticy Cross Domain. We see RxD used for all the content that's not a standard e-learning package. This gets crazy pretty fast. Websites that have dynamic server-side learning experience, gamified things, even AR, VR, XR has been used to connect to stuff that's not typically a SCORM course. Content Controller includes a license that builds a bridge to your more advanced content. And what's great about that is it's a light JavaScript library. We require developers on your side to do this together. But once that integration with Content Controller has been made, your team can keep building those games or whatever it is to whatever specifications you need. And Content Controller deals with all of the LMSs for you so that a learner can launch from Moodle or Cornerstone or Bridge or Desire to Learn or SuccessFactors or Paycom or whatever it is. And their learning experience is your custom experience, has to be in a web browser session, delivered into their LMS. And when they exit, it elegantly updates typically time completion, pass, fail, score in their LMS's standard reports. The rabbit hole is deep here. I would love to talk one-on-one. If your content isn't in an e-learning standard already and you need it to play nicely in another LMS, Content Controller is a great tool for that. And we'd love to explore those things in some pretty great depth. How does versioning work? Each customer can choose when to update the latest version. So John, great question around versioning. Versioning eliminates their LMS from the equation. Update and version the course directly in Content Controller. It shows you versioning history. You can choose what to publish. You can test before you push. And learners will hit the latest version in real time. And our reporting will tell you which version the learner experienced. So no need to go talk to an LMS administrator once a month, once a year, once a quarter, whatever it is, and say, please delete all of these old versions and update the new version. Just your team can push it daily. It's something we see all the time. We have a large medical training company and, you know, it's science. We're learning new things about a pandemic every day, and they're able to update their course every day so that every learning transaction that happens is today's version of our understanding of this training. And they don't have to deploy it to, I think they're in 12,000 LMSs around the world. This is very powerful. They could never achieve scale if Content Controller didn't elegantly have versioning tools inside it. Great question, John. Dave. Integration, whether connecting to our own LMS to import a course content or a third-party tool to distribute content to a customer, thinking from an automation standpoint with the integration. Dave, great question. So there's two paths that solve this problem, and I don't know which one is best in your situation. I'd love to talk about it. Broadly, the two paths are, we could use standards like LTI 1.3. It has some really elegant ways to integrate links instead of packages and keep things up to speed. If the LMS supports LTI 1.3 really well, that can be an easy button to some of those things. If it doesn't, Content Controller also has an automation API, and you can begin to automate things. And some of our largest customers of Content Controller not only distribute out to their partners, their distribution channels, the LMSs where learners live, but they also end up in a situation where they have their own LMSs. And Content Controller holds today's version of the course. They treat themselves as consumers of Content Controller packages in their own LMSs because the versioning alone solves this problem. They use the REST API to make sure that all of these LMSs they spin up for themselves are doing the things with packages from Content Controller, but then they're deploying out into their customers' LMSs, sometimes using LTI and doing that as well. So there are a lot of options there. We've seen massive scale in the number of courses in a package and the language equivalencies and how many LMSs they're sending them out to. And our tool is cleverly able to use standards where we can, and then use REST APIs where we can't. So a lot of options there. We could spend an hour talking through this, and I'd love to. That's one of my favorite topics, is the weird edge cases. We have time. I'm just going to keep going. I guess that's cool with, yeah, great. All right. Elizabeth, interrupt me if I should stop this.
You're doing a great job.
Thanks. Nina, assuming CMI5, can a secondary LRS provide input to the content and Content Controller and thus control termination? Not really. You're getting into some advanced things there, and the answer is it depends. So if your CMI5 content is hosted remotely, we could do things that are similar to these words to help you in near real time analyze the logic. And ultimately, you could be doing things server side that are dynamically generating, is this learner actually complete? And then content controller will send that completion to the LMS for us. That is the line. Your side has to determine what it means to complete, and using XAPI and LRSs are one way to do that, or you could do whatever else you want. So I get a little wiggly there on what the specific answer will be. I'd love to talk about that. You're clearly dealing with a level of XAPI where the details matter, and that's the type of conversation that I look forward to. So we'd love to just casually talk through what you're doing, because I'm also fascinated by how people use XAPI in the real world. Dave asked about data retention. Can you expire and delete data on set defined timeframes? Yeah, Dave, manual using APIs, but we also consider that full part of GDPR. You have to have the right to delete specific data upon request and all of these different ways. And Content Controller fully supports all of that data retention, deletion type of security policies we see. It's pretty mature and around that stuff at this point. Raymond, it's a follow-up. Yay, I'm glad. This is a weird way to have a conversation, but I love it. A follow-up question: if you were going from CMI5 with XAPI statements built into SCORM 1.2, would the same be true? Yeah, you should really reach out to support at rusticysoftware.com for that. You're getting to a level of anything is possible, and sometimes there's no right or wrong answer, but there are some best practices around that we should talk about, because it's its own topic almost. And I'm gonna just wave my hands at, maybe like it's software, a lot of things are possible there, but there might be better ways to approach that depending on what you're trying to do. And I don't want to just speak too generally about a very specific topic. Yeah, we should really just talk through that. Like, the back channel here is some highly technical things that I think a conversation would be good for, because it's a rabbit hole in what you're asking about. Raymond, with the licensing of Content Controller, are we limited in cost to a certain number of unique learners accessing the course we put into Content Controller, and are there file size limits or storage limits? Raymond, Content Controller is a privately hosted application. The Rusticy team can spin it up using a bunch of AWS tools for you. It's our role to find the right business thing. Typically, those licenses start in the $36,000 a year range for around 30,000 learners. And we don't care about course package size or library size or content packages. We try to make it easy to scale on learners, because we found that's kind of how most of our customers think about their world. But I'm open to many different models there. We ultimately treat Content Controller like a catering thing. How many learners do you have? Roughly, what is the party you want to throw? And we do our best to tailor a right size of license to match your needs. And at smaller or entry level or growing scale, our SCORM Cloud's dispatch tool is an equivalent approach that scales based on registrations, learners plus courses, flexible monthly plans. I'm waving my hands a lot at licensing details here, but understand that, yeah, we're flexible. Typically, learners is how we think about it, because it's easier than a lot of other methods, but talk to us through it. No high sales pressure there. But again, it depends on the type of hosting environment you're going to need, and we get into that pricing. But yeah, happy to have that conversation. Joe, is there only limited data exchange with a course from an LMS? Is Content Controller able to communicate further with some LMSs and get things such as email, full name? Is it LMS specific? You're curious about what reporting is available in Content Controller and how can learners be identified? So when the learner launches the empty shell of a Content Controller package from their own LMS, we only get what that shell of a course communicates over. And it's typically course ID, first name, last name, email address. To answer your question specifically, can we get an additional email? Nope. Can we get an employee ID and some type of unique learner thing? Nope. The unique learner ID is generated by the LMS. The e-learning standard that launched that package does that. The first name and last name is done through the e-learning package. ID comes through. No more, no less. That is what we are doing as we connect to those other LMSs. There are strategies. You could add interactions to a course and track additional information and go fetch it later and get what you want. But Content Controller is limited to its interactions with another LMS based on the e-learning standard that we're using to connect to that system. We can only communicate back to that LMS what that e-learning standard lets us do. It's kind of the rules that vampires follow, right? You have to be invited in. So the learner has to launch that package. We only get an information that that package sends, and we can only send information back via that package, which is typically limited to time completion, pass, fail score, and interactions. So it is a limitation of Content Controller, but there are clever ways to get more data, Joe, using different standards and different things and different stuff. But I will dig in my heels and say we can only get what the package sends, and I can only send back what the package can receive. Welcome to standards, but at least Content Controller helps you mix and match. Can you troubleshoot content in Content Controller? Yeah, it's ideal for that. We even have Content Controller customers that are secret squirrels that only use Content Controller for testing content. If you're used to our SCORM Cloud, it has content testing features. It can show you debug logs. It can help you find where completion statuses are happening. If you didn't know that, you should try it out. Our support team's always standing by to help you with those moments. Content Controller provides that same type of testing environment with full debug logs and troubleshooting tools to help you in those situations where you can't use SCORM Cloud for that type of behavior. It's a great way to help teams collaborate together in one spot, version a course. It eliminates the need to ever test again in SCORM Cloud and can give teams a collaborative space to find the source of truth. However that course plays and tracks in SCORM Cloud is how it's going to play and track for your customers in their own LMS, and doing it in one central place is a real strength. Jackie, regarding versioning, when a new version is created, how is course registration handled? When does registration go to the new version? What happens to registered in the old version? A fantastic question, one we get a lot. We give you the power to be a little more in control of these things. By default, when Content Controller relaunches a course, it will allow them to finish the version they previously started, and then subsequent launches will all be in the new version. There's also a concept called instancing at times where you want to push a 2020 version, even though they have the 2019 file. Content Controller helps with those corner cases to help teams make better decisions around that, and to get the visibility into which version each learner took. So love to show you and explore. It is another rabbit hole of, we've seen some really interesting use cases around versioning and what happens in learners in flight and all of those things. And we're pretty comfortable around those conversations too. Content Controller is designed for some advanced uses around that. Dave, clarification around data retention. Cool. Can expiring and deleting of customers' data be automated? Set and define rules to handle that automation. Not in the user interface. We're not sophisticated enough to say, hey, this account needs to have this data expiration rule. My team's all here on this call too. Maybe we should add that to the list. That seems like a pretty good idea for Dave. But we also have a REST API, and anything is possible. So that type of automation is absolutely in bounds for what our customers use, where you might have another system of record that actually is in control of when your data deletion rules should happen, and it can automate that type of deletion activity within Content Controller. So yes, but no, we're in bounds there. That seems like something that one way or another could be automated. Yes, but probably, Dave, like cold water, not out of the box. So, facts are friendly. Nina might have our last question of the day, which has been a pretty good list of questions.
Very good.
Along with first name, last name, and learner ID, do you also get an LMS identifier that can be passed to the secondary LRS? No is the direct answer. We will pass through a course ID, and that course ID will be unique for each account and each e-learning package. So with that course ID, you should be able to deduce what course they were taking and what client they're a part of. So yes, you can get that data because that ID that comes through, and content controllers reports can further abstract it to just show you these are the learners that Acme had, and you could then use the LRS that is integrated into content controller to then statement forward that data to a secondary LRS and do what you want. Surprise, content controller includes an LRS. It is not an endpoint that you can just arbitrarily send XAPI statements to. Content controller will automatically convert the SCORM and AICC tracking information it sees, as well as the XAPI and CMI5 statements happening in a course, into XAPI, store them in the LRS that our tool also includes, and allow you to use XAPI statement forwarding to forward it to another LRS for additional data analytics. You can't just take XAPI statements and arbitrarily send them to content controller and expect us to update things in another LRS. That is a step too far. But content controller, again, is helping to future-proof content you already have, helping support modern content that you're building. And if you need to take data out of content controller for further analysis, you can either use statement forwarding, or you can use our REST API to extract data out in other ways and do what you need to do with it inside of Power BI and some other things. So we've seen customers do some pretty advanced things there. XAPI is kind of anything is possible land. So I get a little wiggly around like, yeah, you can do that, but I'm not sure it is the best approach. We would always just want to talk through those tools in the toolbox to make sure that we're giving you the end in mind, because often knowing exactly what you're trying to accomplish, Rustic can recommend the right standard to just make that problem easier to parse. So there's a lot of ways to answer some of these highly technical questions. All right. Elizabeth, I'm curious, what's your favorite thing about content controller?
I think my favorite thing that content controller can do is versioning. Man, just the idea of being able to seamlessly make sure that everything is up to date, because I'm imagining this on a grand scale as well. You've got a lot of customers, a lot of partners. You can pretty quickly and simply update and version your courses. And I just feel like the old way is out, man. It's just so clunky to go through some of that. And just so specifically how easily you can do that sounds like such a game changer. What about you, Chris?
I like the idea that this makes it super simple to switch between LMSs. I've been at Rustic a very long time, and I hear so many people get frustrated with their LMS and leaving it and going to something else would be this big thing. And I've seen 3 times this month, like content controller saving millions of dollars and human years of work solving a problem in an afternoon. So the more of these type of unusual creatures we can find that content controller plays nice with is the exciting part for me. And really, thanks for being here, everybody. I know based on the questions that I saw come through that there are some deeper conversations to have. We're not a high sales pressure organization. We're good at this one thing and almost nothing else. And we'd love to talk through some of those things, because this is a pretty diverse tool and it's not always obvious how it solves pain. And the easiest way for us to do that is to talk through some of these challenges together. And we're always happy to do it. So thanks for being here, everybody. We really appreciate your time and your attention. And please, we look forward to connecting with you one-on-one, to exploring some of these things in great detail. Or, I mean, I'll talk to you about birds for an hour. I'm sure we can have an interesting conversation there too. So thanks for being here, everybody. Elizabeth, thanks for guiding
y'all.
us through this. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank y'all so much.